Hey guys, tonight we're waking up in a world that absolutely does not want you to survive. You open your eyes to the sour stink of wet thatch, the earthy scent of livestock, and your own skin prickling from a fresh crop of flea bites. It's the 14th century, and you're not a knight, a nun, or a noble. You're a peasant. Congratulations. The air is cold, the hearth is cold, and your breakfast is probably just cold water. You pull yourself out of the straw pile you call a bed. It's damp. It's shared. And yes, something definitely scurried over your leg while you were sleeping. Welcome to the start of another glorious day under the feudal system. You probably won't survive this, but you might. And that might is all a medieval peasant needs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who's listening and where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch your back, it aches already, and step out of the smoky dark of your one-room cottage into a sky that's just starting to blush pink. The dawn mist clings to your woolen tunic. You live in a village of 30, maybe 50 people. No roads, just muddy tracks. Chickens underfoot, a pig snorting from someone's doorway, and someone yelling already about a missing goat. Classic Monday. There's no such thing as privacy here. You wake, work, eat, love, argue, and die in the same patch of earth, likely within sight of the same twisted old tree you carved your initials into as a child. Your house, if we're being generous, is wattle and daub, sticks woven together and smeared with a charming paste of clay, straw, and cow dung. The roof leaks, the walls crumble. But hey, at least it's warmer than sleeping in the open fields, probably. Your feet crunch over frost-bitten dirt as you head to the fields. Or maybe you're heading to your lord's fields, because remember, nothing you grow is really yours. You owe labor to the manor, and if you're caught shirking today's corvée, forced work, you'll get a fine you can't pay or a beating you definitely won't forget. Historians still argue whether the average peasant's life was one of constant suffering or just frequent suffering with the occasional good harvest and festival thrown in. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, if the middle is also covered in boils and toothaches. Now let's talk about the wildlife, specifically what's crawling on you. You scratch your head absently and come away with something under your fingernail. Lice? Absolutely. Fleas? Of course. Bed bugs? They never left. This isn't poor hygiene. This is medieval standard. Everyone has them. Even the king is scratching somewhere under all that velvet. Oh, and your clothes? You haven't changed them in weeks, maybe months. Maybe you've just rebrushed the same crusty tunic until the dirt stopped falling off. But that doesn't bother you anymore. What bothers you is the noise in your stomach. Breakfast isn't a sit-down affair. If you're lucky, you grab a chunk of rye bread, dry, hard, and possibly laced with a little something extra. Ergot. A fungus that grows on stored grain. It can cause hallucinations, seizures, or, mild death. Quirky detail, Some scholars think whole villages may have danced themselves to death under the influence of ergot-contaminated bread. You eat it anyway. You pass the village well, the social hub and lifeline in one. You nod to Matilda, who's already drawn water and is hauling it back on her shoulders. She's 12. That's grown. That's marriage age. That's halfway through life. You wonder if today's the day the steward rides in on his horse, tallying who owes what to the Lord. You try not to make eye contact. If you smile, he might decide you're hiding something valuable. A pig? A second pair of boots? A wife? Doesn't matter. If he wants it, he takes it. And if you complain, the law is not on your side. See, you don't own land. You don't have rights. You're bound to the soil. A lovely poetic phrase that means if your lord sells the land, you go with it like a forgotten sack of onions. It's called serfdom, and it's not great. But here's the irony. While you're poor, overworked, and half-starved, you do have something powerful. The rhythm of the seasons. You know when to sow and when to reap. You read the sky better than any noble reads Latin, and you can tell when a bad wind is blowing in. Literally. Bad air, or miasma, is your plague warning system. When it smells wrong, feels wrong, people start coughing, livestock drop dead, and then you know, it's coming. But that's a problem for next week's version of you. Right now, the fields await. You reach for your hoe and begin the back-breaking rhythm of tilling soil. It's heavy work, repetitive and meditative, if you squint. Your hands are already blistered, and it's not even noon. But you share the field with neighbors, and jokes still float across the rows. Someone burps theatrically. Someone else swears their cow cursed at them. Laughter bubbles up. You laugh too, because if you don't, you cry, and you're dangerously dehydrated as it is. A bell tolls faintly from the village chapel. Not for Mass. Not today. That's just the bell ringer practicing, or bored, or maybe warning that someone died in the night again. You glance up. The old widow's door is open. No one's crying, not yet. You keep hoeing, because that's life. You work. You pray. You die. Preferably in that order. You shift your grip on the hoe, knuckles raw and thumb already bruising. Your stomach reminds you, again, that breakfast was more wish than substance. But lunch? Lunch might actually exist. Just don't expect anything to chew. You trudge home at midday under a sun that feels vaguely threatening. The summer heat isn't kind, especially when your shirt is wool and your water comes from a bucket shared by 10 people, 3 goats, and a frog. You pass the village oven, where the baker's daughter is already pulling blackened loaves from the coals. The smell is smoky, comforting, until you remember half of that bread's going to the Lord. Your share? Whatever's left, if you've paid your milling fee and remembered to not be poor this week. The meal is waiting in a clay bowl on the table, or more accurately, the plank of wood on 2 rocks you call a table. Inside, a grayish soup, the kind that dares you to guess its ingredients. There's cabbage if you're lucky, maybe a carrot stump, definitely some barley, and always a chunk of yesterday's bread floating in the middle like a shipwreck survivor. You eye it with the same grim curiosity as a raccoon encountering a toaster. A popular medieval dish. Pottage. It's the peasant's best friend. Boiled water, grains, weeds, root vegetables, and whatever edible thing you scrounged up. You eat it twice a day, sometimes thrice if someone killed a rat that morning. And yes, people did eat rats. Not regularly, but hunger is an excellent negotiator. Sometimes you grind acorns into flour. You've heard of that trick from your grandmother, who swore by it during the bad year. She also swore at squirrels, but she lived to 43, so clearly she knew something. Quirky tidbit? People soaked those acorns for hours to leach out bitterness, making something that resembled bread if you didn't look directly at it. And once it's dried and baked, it keeps for months, which is ideal because famine doesn't RSVP. Which reminds you, you'd better eat slow. The next crop might fail, and then it's back to scraping moss off trees and convincing yourself dandelion leaves are basically salad. You share your meal with your family, your younger sister, your mother, and your cousin who arrived last winter and never left. You all hunch around the table, taking turns dipping wooden spoons into the same pot. Your mother mutters something about a bad omen in her dreams. Your sister stifles a sneeze. You exchange a glance with your cousin, tight, weary, and too familiar. There's no meat today. That's not unusual. You might get lucky on feast days, or if something drops dead nearby and doesn't smell too bad yet. But daily protein? Forget it. Eggs are too valuable to eat, and chickens too valuable to lose. Milk is for the youngest. And fish? Only if the river forgives you for that time you tried to catch trout with your bare hands and ended up falling in head first. You still hear about that. Historians still argue whether peasants were constantly malnourished or just underfed enough to almost function. Skeletons tell a mixed story. Some signs of long-term hunger, but also periods of decent nutrition, especially in good harvest years. What's clear is that food scarcity was always in the background like an ominous bass line. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand and scrape the last bits from the bowl. Then you bury the bones from the stew, if there were any, outside, away from the dogs, and you brace for the afternoon shift. See, your life revolves around food, but it's never about indulgence. It's about sufficiency. That tightrope walk between eating just enough and stealing a turnip from someone else's patch. And if you think growing your own food means security, think again. The Lord can demand a portion at any time. The weather can betray you. Pests can chew through your best hopes in a single week. You head out again, this time with a sack and a small knife. Foraging, mushrooms, berries, sorrel, maybe wild leeks. You know what's edible because someone once didn't, and died. Every plant comes with a whispered lesson passed from mouth to mouth. This one makes you sleep. This one makes you sick. This one makes your dreams feel real and your feet feel wrong. You find a few mushrooms. Not the poisonous kind you hope. You tap them gently as if they'll confess their secrets. You add a handful of nettles to the bag, too. Painful now, delicious later. Just boil the sting out. That's your motto for life, really. And while you're squatting in the brush, you hear voices on the wind. Travelers on the road. Not nobles, not knights. Maybe a friar, maybe merchants, maybe plague. You tuck your head low. Visitors mean stories. Visitors also mean disease. You weigh your curiosity against your survival instinct. Then step quietly back to the safety of your own shadow. At night, your stomach is full, not stuffed, but full. You've eaten enough to sleep without groaning. That's a win. You sit by the hearth, watching your sister poke the embers. Your cousin hums a low tune, one you don't recognize. The fire flickers over faces that look older than they are. The room smells like wood smoke, wet wool, and boiled nettles. You lean your head back against the wall, worn and warm. Just before your eyes close, you remember the thing that lives in your dreams, the hunger that never speaks, just stares from the corner. You smile. Not tonight. Tonight you ate. The rooster doesn't wait for the sun. He never does. You jolt awake in the thick blackness before dawn, heart kicking against your ribs as if it, too, resents being born into this century. You grope for your cloak, not because it's cold, but because it's the closest thing to privacy you're going to get. Someone's snoring nearby. Someone else is already mumbling a prayer. You step around your sister's elbow and duck out into the mist. The air is cool, soft, almost kind. But you know better. Mornings in the village aren't peaceful. They're just moments of silence before the demands start barking. You head to the commons to collect wood. Firewood is currency, warmth, and survival. It also happens to be strictly regulated. Technically, you're only allowed to collect fallen branches. But who waits for wood to fall when your bones feel like they're made of frost? You eye a low-hanging limb with calculated rebellion, then glance around and snap it clean. Congratulations. You're now a criminal in the eyes of your lord's forest warden. Feudal law is picky like that. Historians still argue whether these common restrictions were enforced with severity or symbolic tolerance. Some lords allowed flexibility, others were pitiless. Chopping off a hand for a poached rabbit wasn't unheard of, though probably more legend than law book. Still, stories like that keep people in line. And fear is cheaper than fences. You make your way back through the fog, bundle of sticks under one arm, and find a few others heading out to do the same. There's old Edgar, hunched and muttering about a fox stealing his soul, and Gwen, whose baby didn't make it through the last frost. No one mentions it. No one has to. The way she stares through you says enough. Back home, the fire is flickering back to life. You rub your hands over it, then warm your boots. The soul is splitting. You consider stuffing it with straw again, or maybe weaving in some of that coarse sheep's wool you tucked away behind the ladder. Winter's coming. You feel it in your teeth. The seasons rule everything. They dictate your chores, your diet, your risks. In summer, the fear is drought. In fall, rot. In winter, it's simple. Freeze or don't. But spring? Spring is famine season in disguise. The food stores are low. The new crops aren't ready. You stretch everything thin, including your patience. This time of year, people get creative. You've eaten boiled bark, sipped broth made from bones too brittle to break. You've chewed leather softened over fire and tried not to think about the smell. It's not desperation, it's habit. Still, there's always someone who claims they know a better way. You remember that herbalist from 2 villages over, the one who swore she could stretch grain with dried pond algae. It turned the bread green and mildly explosive. People still talk about it, mostly to laugh, sometimes to cough. You head out toward the fields, but today's different. Today isn't about crops. Today's about the tithe. Yes, that sacred medieval tradition of giving 1/10 of everything you have, grain, wool, eggs, coin, to the church. Because if there's one thing more powerful than the Lord who owns your land, it's the church that owns your afterlife. You trudge up the hill to the stone chapel. It's the nicest building for miles. Thick walls, small stained glass windows, and a bell you've heard toll death, weddings, and the occasional goat stampede. You carry your offering in a sack, 6 eggs, a skein of homespun yarn, and a single silver penny that you stared at for a full hour before deciding not to hide. Inside, the priest nods solemnly. He's younger than you'd expect, smiles too easily. But when he talks about hellfire, his eyes go flinty. He accepts your tithe without thanks. God already sees your sacrifice, after all. And then, in a moment of rare generosity, he offers you a taste of communion wine. Diluted, of course, but still. It burns like sin and warms like hope. You let it settle in your belly like a secret. Quirky tidbit. The wine isn't always from grapes. In especially poor regions, churches would sanctify local alcohol. Honey mead, weak ale, even fermented fruit juice. The miracles of the Lord, now in berry flavor. After the chapel, you find yourself lingering near the stocks. They're empty today. A good sign. Last week, someone was locked in for stealing a loaf of bread, and someone else for making fun of the priest's haircut. Justice is flexible. You remember your own brush with punishment. That time you traded a neighbor's chicken for a scrap of linen and got caught. You spent a day in the stocks, hands cramped and legs numb, while children threw turnips. One of them hit you in the ear. You never found out whose turnip it was. It's nearly evening by the time you return home. Your hands are raw from carrying wood, and your knees ache from kneeling in the chapel. You sit by the fire again. Your cousins carved a spoon from a bit of driftwood. Your sister sings a song you haven't heard since you were small, a lullaby about the stars being holes poked through the sky by angels with sharp fingers. You smile. For a moment, the world softens. Even the lice quiet down. And just as you begin to think maybe this life isn't all bleak, the wind shifts. You smell it. Faint, metallic, wrong. Not the smell of rot. Not yet. But something close. Something warning. You tuck your cloak tighter and whisper a prayer, even though your stomach is already full of them. You wake to bells. Not the soft clang of the chapel bell. Not even the farmer's iron triangle calling hands to labor. These bells are frantic, panicked metal punches against the morning air. A warning. You sit up too fast and knock your head against the low rafter. Your sister stirs beside you, bleary-eyed, and already whispering that prayer again, the one that loops endlessly, half Latin, half fear. You throw on your tunic and rush outside, bare feet slapping the dirt, not knowing what you'll find, but suspecting someone's died. Again. The cluster of villagers gathers near the edge of the lane, where 2 thatch-roof cottages lean in like old, gossiping drunks. You push through the bodies, smelling breath, wool, unwashed skin, and, under all of it, the sharp sting of vinegar. The healer's already here. So is the priest. They stand outside the door, murmuring to each other. The priest clutches his incense like a shield. A man named Hamlin has died. You remember him. He used to whistle while digging graves. Somehow that made it worse. His wife says he woke in the night with a swelling under his arm the size of an apple. By morning, he couldn't speak. By noon, he was dead. And then someone whispers the word you've been dreading. Plague. Not illness, not fever. This is different. It's the black one, the great mortality, the one the traveling friar spoke of last autumn, eyes hollowed by road dust. He said it emptied whole towns in Italy, said the air turned sour and even the saints hid their faces. You don't know if that was poetry or prophecy, but you do know this. Someone is already burning straw in the corners of their home, hoping the smoke keeps the sickness out. Historians still argue whether the plague came from fleas on rats or ships in harbors, or a punishment from heaven wearing the disguise of biology. All you know is that it moves faster than your fear can prepare for. People scatter, some back to their homes, others to the woods. One man strips off his tunic and begins smearing mud across his face, chanting something about sin. You decide to stay put, for now. Not because you're brave, because you're frozen. Back in your cottage, your mother paces. She says not to worry. She says it's probably a bad cough. She says she'll boil elderberry root, and it'll all pass like last year's fever. But you see the twitch in her mouth, the way her hand trembles as she lights the lamp. You help her hang garlic above the door. You scatter herbs across the floor. Rosemary, sage, wild mint if you can spare it. Not because you think it'll work, but because doing something feels better than doing nothing. You even scrub the walls with lye and vinegar. The stinging fumes make your eyes water, but still you scrub. You remember what the friar said. The plague likes the dirty. You look at your hands, at your feet, at the thin black line of grime under every fingernail. You wonder if the plague is already in you, if it's just waiting for the right night to bloom. You try to keep busy. You fetch water. Farther upstream now, just in case the old well has turned foul. You feed the chickens. You patch a hole in the roof with a flat stone and some old fabric. Anything to ignore the echo of coughing from 2 houses over. And still you eat. You have to. Plague or no, the hunger keeps knocking. Your mother makes a stew thick with lentils and onions. You pretend the taste hasn't dulled. You chew slowly, trying not to think of the empty seats at the tables of others. Quirky tidbit. During outbreaks, some people would carry pomanders, little spheres filled with spices or scented oils, to sniff and ward off bad air. Others stuffed oranges with cloves and tied them to their belts like medieval air fresheners. One boy down the lane swears he sleeps with his nose buried in a sock filled with thyme. Says it keeps the demons out. That night, a fire glows behind Hamlin's house. Not a hearth fire, a burning. They're torching his belongings. Bed linens, clothes, even his shoes. His wife weeps, kept at a distance. No one helps her. No one dares. Grief has a radius now, and comfort isn't worth the risk. a crude white thing, smeared like a wound that refuses to scab. No one knocks. No one even walks past it if they can help it. You give it a wide berth on your way to the stream, hugging your water jug like it's sacred. On the fourth day, the cross is gone. So is the healer. Some say she fled. Others say she didn't get the chance. In her place, there's an eerie quiet. You start to notice what's missing. Edgar's mumbling, Gwen's singing, the clatter of spoons from the big house on the hill. Absences bloom like bruises, and no one wants to say how they got there. You aren't allowed to leave the village. Not officially. The bailiff, your lord's thin-lipped enforcer, makes the rounds each morning now, eyes sharp, mouth tighter than ever. No unnecessary travel, he barks, like anyone's going to the seaside for leisure these days. Still, you sneak to the edge of the woods one afternoon, just to breathe something that doesn't smell of vinegar, death, or cabbage. The forest is alive in a way your village isn't. Birds flit, leaves rustle. A deer glances at you and bolts. You envy it more than you'd like to admit. You don't go far. Not out of fear of getting caught, though that's part of it, but because deep down you know there's nowhere else to go. The plague isn't a wolf you can outrun. It's the air, the soil, the breath of the man who stood too close yesterday. Still, you keep an eye on the sky, just in case there's an omen, a change, anything. Historians still argue whether some villages truly sealed themselves off from outsiders, practicing proto-quarantine centuries before germ theory. Some accounts suggest yes, entire communities locking down, forbidding outsiders surviving. Others dismiss it as legend inflated by modern hindsight. All you know is that your village feels smaller every day and quieter. The Lord sends word that no more tithes will be collected until the pestilence passes. A kindness? Maybe. But more likely, he doesn't want infected eggs or plague-tinged wool on his estate. The cynicism comforts you more than you'd like to admit. Your sister begins weaving again. Not for market. There's no one left to trade with. But for the motion of it. Over, under, pull. The loom creaks like an old friend, and for a few hours each day, the house has a heartbeat again. You find yourself checking on your neighbors more often. From a distance, of course. You shout across fences. You leave bundles of herbs on doorsteps. You ask no questions. You expect no thanks. One morning, a cart rumbles into the village, pulled by a mule that looks as tired as you feel. Two men ride up front. Monks, maybe, or just desperate. Their robes are patchy, their faces wrapped in linen soaked with something that smells like wine and rot. They're flagellants. You've heard of them. Men who travel from town to town whipping themselves, crying out repentance, begging God to notice their pain. You watch from behind a fence as they pass through, singing in a language you don't understand. The cords they use to lash their backs swinging from their belts. One of them collapses near the chapel. The priest doesn't come out. The other drags him away. Quirky tidbit. Some flagellants claimed their blood had healing properties. Villagers would sometimes collect it in little jars, believing it could ward off the plague. You can't decide if that's inspiring or insane. Maybe both. Back at home, your cousin starts coughing. A soft sound at first, barely noticeable, but you notice. You count the seconds between coughs like they're the ticking of a clock you never wound. You tell yourself it's dust. It's nothing. He's young, strong. He'll be fine. By nightfall, he's not. Your mother boils herbs. Your sister whispers prayers so fast the words blur. You do both. And you do neither. You sit outside the house, back against the wall, hands gripping your knees, eyes fixed on a star that refuses to blink. You're not afraid of death. Not really. You've seen it enough to know it wears no crown and keeps no schedule. But you are afraid of being the one who survives, of waking up with too many silences and not enough names. The next morning, your cousin is gone. The priest won't come. So you dig. The earth is soft from rain. That helps, but the clay clings to your hands, and each shovelful feels like a confession. Your sister places a cross at the head of the grave, 2 sticks bound with a scrap of linen from his tunic. You don't say anything. Words feel cheap. The sky is overcast and kind. That's enough. And for the first time, you understand why the old songs talk about heaven like it's a place. Not a concept, not a reward, a place. With grass that doesn't die and skies that never darken. You hope he's there. You hope, if nothing else, the food's better. You sit by the grave until dusk. You listen to the wind. And you wonder, how much more loss can a person carry before the silence wins? You stop counting the days. Not because they no longer matter, but because they're all the same shade of gray. Wake, work, wait, worry, hope, sleep, if sleep comes. If it doesn't, you just stare at the beams overhead and trace patterns in the cobwebs. You swear some of the spiders know your name by now. There's a strange, slow rhythm to plague time. Everything crawls, except the fear. That part still gallops. You hear talk, muttered between shut windows, passed in glances, about escape. A few families are thinking of leaving, heading north, maybe to the next town, or to the hills beyond the woods where they say the air is cleaner. You don't ask who started the rumor. That's not important. What matters is the spark, a possibility, flickering in the murk. But leaving isn't simple. You're a peasant. You owe your labor to the land, to the Lord, to the bailiff with the hawk eyes and bony knuckles. If you vanish, it's theft. Of work, of taxes, of presents. It's a crime. Still, the rules feel a little softer these days, like butter left too long in the sun. Historians still argue whether the mass peasant migrations during plague years were spontaneous or organized. Some believe these were individual rebellions against the feudal system. Others suggest they were acts of desperation with no clear plan, just the raw instinct to run. You understand both possibilities. One morning, you help bury an old woman who lived alone at the edge of the village. No family left, no animals, just a tiny garden, overgrown and stubborn. She's wrapped in her best shawl, though the color has faded to something between dust and shadow. The priest doesn't attend. He's sick now, too. No one speaks during the burial. The only sound is the soil hitting cloth. It feels like closing a book you were only halfway through. Afterward, you linger at the edge of the field, and you realize something. The weeds are winning. The barley is patchy. The orchard is quiet. No bees. The pigs haven't been seen in days, and the path to the mill is overtaken by bramble, like nature's trying to swallow the road whole. Even the chickens look confused. Famine and plague go hand in hand, like drunks supporting each other home. One weakens you, the other finishes the job. There's not enough hands to harvest, not enough mouths to complain. Bread is thinner. Soups are more imagination than substance. So you do what others are doing. You cheat. A turnip from the Lord's field here. A duck egg snuck from the manor's coop there. Nothing big, nothing greedy, just survival-sized thefts. And somehow they taste better. You laugh at that. Actually laugh. The kind that catches you by surprise and snorts out of your nose, Your sister gives you a look, half scandal, half relief. She laughs too. It's the first time in weeks. That night, someone lights a candle in every window on the eastern side of the village. No one knows why. Maybe to honor the dead. Maybe just to see something warm. The flicker makes your cottage look like it's full of ghosts, but friendly ones. Quirky tidbit? In some villages, people believed ringing church bells could drive the plague away. The vibrations were thought to scare off evil spirits. In one nearby town, the bell ringer refused to stop tolling for an entire week. He lost his hearing, but the village claims it kept the sickness at bay. No one agrees if it's true. But the bell tower there still stands. You dream of that town sometimes. A place where one man's noise saved everyone. In your dream, the bell doesn't stop, even when the sun rises. Back in the waking world, more fields are left untended. The cows roam unsupervised. You see one chewing on someone's laundry. No one rushes to stop it. Everyone's too tired to care. You wake early now, even before the roosters. Not because you want to, but because your body's forgotten what rest feels like. You sit outside, cloak wrapped tight, and watch the mist slide low along the ground. It looks like the earth is breathing. That morning, you decide to go see what's left of the manor house. You've never been allowed close. That's Lord's territory, off limits. But no one stops you now. The gates are open. Inside, the silence is worse than any plague bell. Chairs sit untouched. The hearth is cold. A goblet lies on the floor like someone dropped it mid-sentence. You walk slowly, expecting to be caught. But by whom? Even the great hall smells like mildew now. And something sweeter underneath. Not rot, exactly. Just absence. You find a pantry still stocked with dried meat, honey, old wheels of cheese. Your mouth waters. But you don't touch anything, not out of guilt, out of superstition. This place feels watched, even if it's empty. On your way out, you see a portrait hanging askew. The Lord's daughter, maybe. She has eyes that follow you in that weird, painted way. You give her a nod, like you're sorry she had to live in this century too. Then you leave. You tell no one you were there. Instead, you return to the edge of the village and carve a tiny mark into the old oak tree. A private tally. Not for days survived, for moments of stubbornness. You plan to keep marking until you forget what number you're on. Maybe you'll escape one day, maybe not. But today, you're still standing. You're shelling peas when the crier returns. He's gaunt, horse thinner than ever, cloak reeking of the long road. But he's alive. That counts for something now. He plants himself in the center of the square, bell in hand, and rings it 3 times. Not the solemn toll of death. This is sharper, urgent. Everyone who can still walk limps out to hear. You shuffle forward, the hem of your tunic brushing against straw and dust. Your stomach twists. Not fear this time, but something stranger. Hope. King's writ, he announces, by order of His Majesty. You already stop listening. The words float past, coded in self-importance and echo. But one phrase hits you like a slap. Serfs may now leave their lands. You blink. The world tilts sideways for a moment. The crier repeats it, slower this time, as if tasting the revolution in his mouth. Historians still argue whether royal edicts like this were genuine attempts to preserve order, or just hasty measures to keep crops growing and cities breathing. Either way, it doesn't matter to you. The words are real enough. The crowd doesn't cheer. There's no celebration. Just a stunned quiet, like a bird realizing the cage door is open but too weak to fly. You head home without speaking. The peas are forgotten, scattered in your apron. Your mother watches you cross the threshold, then quietly hands you a flask of cider. You both drink without a word. It tastes like last year. Before the plague, before the hush, before everything. By sundown, two families are already packing. Children clutching dolls, pots strapped to backs, bread wrapped in cloth. No idea where they're going, just elsewhere. Somewhere the dead don't outnumber the living. You think about leaving too, but then you look around. At the hearth, the garden, the scratch on the door frame from when your cousin grew too tall for the lintel. This is yours, and right now, that feels like a reason to stay. So instead, you do something daring. You ask for payment. It starts small. A loaf of rye in return for gathering firewood. A pair of worn boots to help repair someone's fence. It's not much, but it's wages. Real, earned coin, or goods. You're no longer just owed by the land. You're offering a trade. And the strangest thing? People agree. The Lord's steward shows up days later, face sour as curdled milk. "What's this nonsense about wages?" he snaps. You smile, just a little. "We're not bonded anymore." He blinks, like he didn't expect you to say it out loud. Quirky tidbit? In some parts of England, freed serfs would wear a scrap of blue cloth on their sleeve, proof of their liberty, a badge of pride. You think about doing the same, but settle for tucking a sprig of lavender into your belt. Smells better, and keeps the fleas away. The steward doesn't push. He just mutters and leaves. You realize something then. He's afraid. Not of you, exactly, but of the change. The shift in the world's balance, like a table losing one leg. Freedom is loud in the silence it leaves behind. You're not alone in noticing. The priest, once aloof and distant, starts inviting folks to the chapel again. Not for service, but for soup. He doesn't preach. He just ladles. You respect him more for that than for all his Latin. Your sister begins dyeing wool. Not because she has to, but because she wants to. Deep crimsons, soft greens. For trade, she says, but you see the smile behind it. She's crafting color into a world that's been stuck on grayscale. The village slowly tilts upright again. Not all at once, not cleanly. Some fields still lie fallow. Some homes still bear crosses on the doors, faded but not forgotten. But laughter returns, in pockets. Children play again. Someone finds an old flute and wheezes out a song no one remembers the name of. You dance to it anyway. Historians argue whether the Black Death truly ended feudalism or merely poked holes in a system already cracking. The textbooks will bicker forever. But in your village, the difference is real. It grows with each barter, each shared loaf, each no spoken where, "Yes, my lord," used to be automatic. You begin to write your own rules. You and 3 other families decide to work the North Field together, share the labor, split the yield. It's messy, sure. Arguments over planting rows, pig manure ratios, and whose goat is the laziest. But it's yours, and you wouldn't trade that for all the Lord's wine. One morning, you wake up early, before even the sun dares show its face. You grab a crust of bread, a hunk of cheese, and walk to the edge of the woods. Not to flee, just to breathe. The air is sharp with dew and pine. The world feels larger again. Not safe, not yet, but wide, and that's enough. A fox darts across your path. It pauses, looks at you. You swear it winks. You wink back. And for the first time in what feels like a century, you whisper aloud. Not a prayer, not a wish, but a promise. I'm not going back to how it was. The trees nod in agreement. The first fare arrives like thunder after drought. It's not even official. Just a cluster of carts, a few tents, and someone roasting onions over a stolen spit. But to you, it feels like the world decided to throw a party in the ruins. The path leading to it is beaten down by many bare feet, and the field it occupies is loud with color and smell and sound. You clutch a few coins, real ones, earned from hauling timber and mending fences. They jingle in your pocket like tiny brass secrets. There's music. Bad, scratchy, out-of-tune music, but music all the same. And the sweet reek of honey cakes. And laughter. You'd forgotten how much you missed that sound. Not nervous laughter, not the awkward chuckles at gallows humor, but actual belly-deep joy. You pass a boy selling dyed ribbons, his only remaining stock. His hands are covered in red ink, and he swears one of them used to be blue, but the sun had other ideas. You buy one anyway. Tie it around your wrist. A freedom bracelet of sorts. There's a woman selling saltfish and another, possibly her twin, shouting about miracle thimbles that never bend. You nearly trip over a one-eyed goose. You suspect it may be in charge. Historians still argue whether these post-plague free markets were truly spontaneous or quietly tolerated by collapsing authorities trying to reassert control through distraction. Either way, they changed something. Because you're here. Spending. Earning. Choosing. You wander past a stall of second-hand boots. A man beckons you toward a jug of something that smells like burnt fruit and poor judgment. You decline. Not because you're polite, because you want to remember this day. You even see the steward. But he's not in his fine coat. He's trying to sell candied almonds, badly. You nod as you pass. He pretends not to see you. His hands are shaking. You're not cruel about it. But it does feel good. In the middle of the fair, a makeshift stage. A juggler with uneven eyes flings turnips into the air, catches two, drops one. Everyone cheers anyway. A dog barks along. You sit, legs stretched, and let the sunlight spill over your face. It's warm. Not the heat of summer, but the slow return of May. And then someone sings. Not a grand song. A work song, likely older than the hills. But people join in. One voice becomes 3, then 10. The lyrics change halfway through, forgotten and remade. It doesn't matter. The tune holds. And your throat joins in before your mind approves. It's not music for nobility. It's music for surviving, for planting, for staying. Quirky tidbit. Some peasants carried charm potatoes. Small, dried-out tubers carved with little faces, kept in their pockets during fairs for luck. If someone dropped one, they'd chase it down like a runaway coin. You spot a boy with one dangling from a string. He swears it protected his family from the flux. You don't question it. The fair ends late. Not with a closing bell, but with a sigh. People drift home with arms full of thread, sausages, and stories. You help an old man carry his new hoe. He insists it's cursed in a good way. On the walk back, you hear someone say the word future, not like a threat, like a direction. You sleep that night with the ribbon still tied to your wrist. The dreams come softer. Next morning, the rain returns. Gentle, persistent, earthy. Not the punishing storms from earlier in the year. This one's a lullaby in drops. You walk the fields, inspecting what's left. Some furrows are sprouting again. Early beans, stubborn rye. The earth didn't die. It just waited, like you. And now the village begins to learn something radical. You can say no. No, I won't take less than a fair day's coin. No, I won't clean the manor's latrines for free. No, I won't let you marry off my daughter like she's a sack of barley. And the most dangerous no of all. No, I'm not afraid of you anymore. these little refusals stitch a new kind of life into the seams of the old. At first, they're whispered, then said aloud, then shouted. And when they're shouted, others listen. You help fix a neighbor's roof. She pays you in cheese and stories. You trade the cheese for a new belt. You trade the belt for a sewing needle. The needle mends your torn shirt. The shirt impresses a girl. The girl makes you blush. You're rich in the strangest ways now. And with the wealth comes planning. You and others meet by the old well after dusk. You don't call it a council. That sounds too official. But it is one. You talk about how to split the harvest, where to build the new kiln, what to do if the steward tries to reclaim the fields. One boy, barely old enough to hold a scythe, suggests painting over the Lord's crest on the granary. You all pause. Then someone says, "What would we paint instead?" A long silence. Then, a chicken, wearing a crown. You laugh. Everyone laughs. It's stupid, but you're all already picturing it. Maybe freedom does wear feathers. Historians still debate how much autonomy these post-plague village communes really had. Some claim they were just temporary blips in the grand order, soon crushed. Others believe they sowed the seeds of something bigger, early echoes of self-rule, democracy, collective power. You don't know the right answer. But when you lie in bed, you imagine your grandchildren asking what it was like when the world cracked, and you helped patch it with stubbornness and song. And you'll say, "It was awful, and beautiful, and ours." You don't remember who first said it. Maybe the Thatcher with 3 teeth or that boy with the runaway charm potato. But one day, the words slip into conversation like they've always been there. We're not peasants anymore. They fall gently, without drama. No trumpets, no royal decree. Just a sentence tossed into the mud between hauling sacks and sharpening scythes. You pause, rake in hand, and let the phrase settle in your chest. Not peasants, not bound, not owned. Just people. Sure, the Lord still technically owns the land, but his boots haven't graced this soil in months, and the steward's visits grow rarer, shorter, more uncertain. He doesn't bark orders now. He makes suggestions. Carefully. Because he knows what you've all started to suspect. He needs you more than you need him. The village feels different now. You've planted a second round of beans. The kiln smokes daily. There's even talk of repairing the abandoned mill by the river. Not for the Lord's grain, but for yours. Historians still argue whether this post-plague shift was the true beginning of England's middle class, or just a temporary social rearrangement. You don't care what future scribblers will call it. You just know life finally feels like it's moving forward instead of grinding you beneath it. And, as if to prove it, the peddler returns. Same crooked hat, same donkey that farts at inconvenient times. But his cart is full, fuller than ever. Iron nails, tiny mirrors, a comb made from antler, 3 bolts of wool in colors that make your eyes ache. Marigold, lapis, beetroot. He's not the only one. A woman follows days later with ceramic bowls and painted jugs. Then another man with spices wrapped in oilskin cinnamon, maybe, or crushed something pretending to be. The world is leaking back in. You learn a new phrase. We'll trade. It feels better than, what can you spare? It means you have something worth offering. Soon, you're trading salted meat for ink, extra shoes for a spinning wheel, labor for knowledge. A man who once worked in a monastery teaches your cousin to read. You can't yet, but you're thinking about it. Thinking about making your mark in more than dirt. Quirky tidbit. Some ex-serfs began inventing last names around this time. You'd never needed one before. Why bother when everyone knew you as Tom's daughter or the tall one with the cow? But now you might need a way to be remembered. You consider Briarfoot for a week after stepping on a thorn and refusing to limp. Has a nice ring to it. With trade and names and confidence comes something you never expected. Pride. You see it in the way your sister stitches her shawl with a pattern no one taught her. In the way the old men tell stories without flinching. In the way children now play games where they are the Lord, issuing silly decrees like, all goats must wear flowers. You even feel it in your bones when you rise at dawn, not dread, but purpose. The aches don't vanish, but they come with meaning. And slowly you begin to make changes no one asked for. The old paths are cleared. Stones are lined to guide carts more smoothly. A ditch is dug to divert floodwater from the barley patch. You build benches near the well, not because anyone told you to, but because you can. One morning, you catch yourself humming as you patch a roof. Not a sad tune, not even a prayer. Just sound, curling into sky. There's no formal vote, no parchment signed, but everyone seems to agree. The manor house is just a house now, empty, covered in ivy. The door swings on one hinge, you all avoid it. Not from fear, just distaste, like rotten meat in an old bowl. Let it rot, someone mutters, and no one disagrees. Instead, energy shifts to the chapel. You clean it together, scrub away the soot. Someone replaces the roof tiles. You even fix the bell, because even if you don't always believe the words, you believe in gathering. The priest begins teaching letters on Wednesdays. You show up. You draw loops on slate. Your tongue sticking out as you try not to smudge it with your sleeve. You're terrible at it, but every clumsy scratch is yours. Historians love pointing to literacy rates rising after the Black Death. It's true, technically, but the real story isn't numbers. It's you, holding a bit of chalk, realizing you can write your own name, and then doing it. People from other villages begin arriving. Some are strangers. Others are distant cousins you hadn't seen since you both still had baby teeth. They ask if they can stay. You say yes, because more hands mean more hope. Together, you raise a new barn. The beam lifts on a song and a shared meal. Someone paints a chicken on the side, wearing a crown. That night, you sit by the fire and listen to the wind. It doesn't carry the reek of smoke or the cries of the sick. Just the rustle of trees and a single owl that refuses to find a less annoying perch. The ribbon on your wrist is fraying. You leave it there anyway. It's part of you now. Like the calluses on your hands. Like the melody in your chest. Like the truth rising in your throat. You survived. And more than that, you built something. Not a kingdom, not a castle, but a life. The smell hits you first, sun-warmed earth and cut grass and bread. Real bread. Not the rough half-burnt pucks you used to scrape with a stick. This one has a crust, a color. Someone used flour fine enough to make angels jealous. And you know who baked it. Meg, with the broad arms and terrible laugh, who started a community oven near the old well. You gave her 3 handfuls of grain last week. You weren't even expecting anything back. But here it is. a gift just because. That's the thing about surviving something like the plague. It peels the world down to its bones. But once the bones are bare, you can start over, and sometimes you start softer. You bite the bread and nearly cry. It's still warm, chewy in the middle, a little smoky, a little sweet. You'd marry it if the church allowed. Later, while helping stack kindling, someone says, "We should write all this down, in case it happens again." You freeze, not because it's a bad idea, but because it feels dangerous, like daring fate to notice you again. Still, you nod. You've started learning letters after all. Maybe it's time to start remembering properly. So, a kind of village book begins, a stitched pile of parchment and old cloth kept in a chest beside the chapel. Not just names and dates, but songs, proverbs, recipes. The story of a boy who tried to race a goose and lost a shoe. The real reason why the cow pond was cursed for 3 weeks last summer. The correct way to plant turnips if you want them shaped like hearts. Quirky fact: some of these early peasant-written books did survive often in fragments, often wedged into the backs of religious texts. They weren't polished, they weren't noble, but they were real. And here's the wildest part. You wrote 1 page. Clumsy ink, shaky lines, but your words. And that changes something. Because when you write something down, it's like claiming a little piece of the world. You walk the fields now with your head higher. Not just because the rye is thick or the sky is clear, but because you know what's yours. You know. Still, not everyone is thrilled. Words spreading. Lords talk of lost dues. Bishops moan about order. The old gears of power grind back to life, rusty but furious. A royal messenger rides through one day. Dusty, sour, and unimpressed. He posts a decree on the chapel door. Work for your lords. Obey the rates. The land is not your own. The village gathers to read it. Some can't. Others do aloud. You understand every word. And then you do something unthinkable. You laugh. Not mockery, not defiance, just this low, weary chuckle that says, "You're too late." Because how do you explain to parchment and wax seals that you've changed? That this isn't the same village? That you aren't the same person? That trying to shove life back into the old boxes now would be like asking bread to become dough again? Historians still debate the impact of the 1351 Statute of Laborers, which tried to cap wages and force peasants back to their pre-plague roles. Some say it failed entirely. Others claim it planted seeds of rebellion. All agree it came too late to stop the shift. In your village, it's mostly ignored. Sure, the steward shows up once with a tired smile and a copy of the law. He gets invited to dinner, eats too much lentil stew, says nothing when someone asks if he remembers how to dig a trench, leaves the next morning looking very pale. From then on, the laws arrive only as rumors. Meanwhile, your people keep building. A second kiln goes up. Someone experiments with mixing ash into the soil. There's talk of a school, a real one. Indoors with benches and quills. You, of all people, get asked to help teach letters. Me, you say, mid-turnip pull? Yes, they say. You have good hands, patient ones. So you go. You show kids how to hold the slate, how to loop the A without turning it into a fishhook. You invent a game involving pebbles and syllables. You catch yourself enjoying it. Later that week, one of the girls hands you a folded scrap with your name on it. Or at least a version of it. Your heart folds too. That night, under the stars, someone plays a fiddle. Where it came from, no one knows. Might have been hidden. Might have been stolen. Might have been found. It plays a tune older than memory. You sit on the grass, ribbon still on your wrist, watching the sky turn purple. And, for a moment, just a breath, you believe the stars are looking back, like they've been waiting to see what you'd become. You know things won't stay quiet forever. No story ever does. Already, there are rumors of rebellion in the north, of taxes rising again, of kings and bishops planning how to fix what's changed. But that's tomorrow. Tonight, you're full of bread, laughter, music, and firelight. The air smells like herbs and sheep and river mist. The children are asleep. The grown-ups are humming. The world, for now, is kind. And you realize something. You're not just surviving anymore. You're living. And that feels like revolution. The first time you see a coin with your own eyes, not just hear about it from the steward or dream of it during fevered nights, you're digging up parsnips. The soil clings to your fingers, damp and gritty, and there it is, a worn silver penny, glinting between two roots like it grew there. You turn it over slowly, smearing it clean with your thumb. A face stares back, pale, judgy, some long-dead king with a crown and too many chins. You show it to the others, expecting awe. But someone shrugs and says, "You should keep that. Might be lucky." And you realize something profound. No one here needs it. Not urgently, at least. Because suddenly, somehow, you're not starving. You're not begging. You're not in debt to some unseen ledger in a stone tower. You're fine. Better than fine. Your belly is full more days than not. Your roof leaks less. Your child just asked what a castle was like and meant it abstractly. You pocket the coin and laugh. That's how wealth begins. Not in gold, but in not needing it every second of your life. Historians still argue whether this was the true dawn of the wage economy in rural England, whether peasants became proto-capitalists, or just resourceful survivors. You don't use those words. But you do notice more trade, more travelers, more strange accents and strange ideas showing up at your gates. Take Aldwin, for example. He walks in from the west one afternoon with a limp, a lute, and a recipe for something called onion pie. You offer him stew, and he offers a song in return, one about a woman who tricks death by hiding in a sack of beans. It makes no sense, but everyone claps anyway. Aldwin stays, becomes part of the fabric, teaches you a few chords. You're awful at them, of course, but you try. And your niece, the one with the loud laugh, she takes to it like bees to clover. Soon, evenings are full of music, clapping, dancing. There's a makeshift stage near the well now. Someone built it out of spare barnwood and faith. And this, right here, this new joy, it's not a luxury. It's survival, leveled up. It's what comes after you've clawed your way out of the pit. It's what makes the climbing worth it. You hear whispers from the next village over murmurs of revolt, of men in hoods talking about justice, of letters passed under bread crusts and coded phrases like, "The lamb bites back." People are angry again, but now they're organized. You're cautious but curious. You know the lords will try to snatch control again. The laws, the taxes, the tithes. There's always another grip reaching down from the castle tower. But this time, your hands aren't empty. You've learned to bargain. You've learned to say no. You've even learned to walk away from the village entirely if you must. Because now, people know your name in other hamlets. They've seen your wares, heard your songs, read the words you scratched on hide and scrap. That's freedom. Odd tidbit. Around this time, some peasants began painting symbols on their doorposts, personal sigils. Not to repel spirits, but to say, "This is mine," a mark of identity, like a flag made of flour and smoke. you draw your own one night with charcoal and ash, a crooked sun with 3 dots inside. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it means everything. You don't care. It's yours. You still remember hunger, of course. Still feel it in the way you squirrel away beans or count every egg twice. But you also know how to fix a roof, tan a hide, trap a rabbit, raise a child, bury a friend, soothe a fever, cure an ache, and teach a stranger how to mend their own sleeves. That's wealth, too. More importantly, you know how to laugh in the face of winter. Not because it's funny, but because laughing makes your breath rise like smoke, and that's proof you're still here. The seasons turn again. Spring with its mud and tiny shoots. Summer with bees drunk on blossoms. Autumn with its copper light and smells of cider and peat. Winter comes quieter now, less like a knife, more like a lullaby sung in minor key. You still light the same fire every night. But now, there's a chair beside it for guests, a second cup, a third bowl. And sometimes the peddler comes again. Not to sell, but to stay. He brings a tin whistle, plays it like the moon is listening. The children ask him for stories, and he gives them tales of dancing cats and ghostly queens and talking pigs that solve crimes. You know half of it's nonsense, but you let yourself believe. Just a little. Because belief is part of the healing. Even now. One night, someone asks what you'll do if the lords come back. If they bring swords and orders and scrolls heavy with wax. You look up from your stitching and say, "We'll talk." And if they don't listen, you smile. Then we'll teach them how. You're not the same person who knelt in a field and prayed for the sickness to pass. That version of you lives somewhere in your marrow, sure, but now you've grown around them. Like ivy curling up the bones of an old wall. Stronger, softer, wiser, rooted. And the best part? 12:08 a.m. You didn't do it alone. No one survives the end of the world on their own. Not in the real world. Not in yours. The first time you see a map, an actual drawn map, with rivers like blue snakes and hills like green bruises, you're stunned. Not because of the artistry, which is, frankly, mediocre, but because your village is on it. Right there. A scribbled name. Slightly misspelled. But it's you. And, for a moment, your heart skips. You existed. You mattered. You were more than just fog and barley and aching knees. You're a dot on someone else's parchment now. A line in a ledger. A whisper made permanent. The traveler who carries the map is an odd one. Claims to be a clerk for a noble's steward, but his shoes are too clean and he talks like he swallowed a whole monastery. Still, he trades news and cheese, so you humor him. He tells you the king's men are worried. That too many peasants have forgotten their place, that some towns are forming guilds now, unofficial ones. You raise an eyebrow. Unofficial sounds suspiciously like ours. He doesn't laugh. Historians still argue whether these rural collectives, these proto-unions of shepherds, bakers, hedge doctors, and coopers, were truly political or just survival tools. But from where you sit, huddled near the fire and carving a spoon, it's obvious. You're organizing. You're cooperating. You're thinking ahead. Last year, one of the older lads helped build a pulley system for hauling water from the deeper well. The rope is itchy, but it works. This year, you've got plans for a windbreak fence and a new grain store. The plans are in chalk, sure, but they're plans. You pause sometimes and think, is this progress? Then the chickens escape again, and you decide it's more like chaos wearing a clever hat. Still, there's a rhythm now, and in that rhythm, you thrive. You grow broad beans that fatten overnight. You fish with woven nets. You swap goods at a local fair that's doubled in size since last year. Someone even brings a box of tiny glass beads from across the sea. You trade 2 skeins of wool for them and immediately regret it, but they do look dazzling in sunlight. Odd fact: archaeologists have found such beads in the teeth of medieval children, possibly worn as charms, or chewed during illness. No one knows for sure. You try threading one into your niece's braid. She beams like she owns the moon. There's a strange kind of pride now in being just a peasant. You've redefined the word. You're not bound to the soil by fear or debt anymore. You choose it. You understand it. You wrestle meaning from it. And then, just when you think the world might settle, a rumor blows in. A rebellion. Not a quiet, whispered, maybe the sheep will refuse to graze rebellion. A real one. A taxman was attacked. A manor burned. Some say the king's portrait was trampled in a marketplace, which feels a little dramatic but also oddly satisfying. The clerk warns you to stay quiet. Keep your head down. But you've learned something since the plague. Heads held too low grow brittle. So you talk. Not loudly, not foolishly, but around fires, over bowls of porridge, between fence posts and washing lines. You talk about fairness, about dignity, about the way people like you rebuilt the world after it broke, while the lords simply waited for someone else to do the sweeping. It's not treason, not really, it's truth. You hear tales of a man named Watt leading crowds in London, of thousands marching, of demands, real ones, not whispered hopes, but declarations. Historians still debate the exact motivations behind the 1381 Peasants' Revolt, whether it was about wages, taxes, or justice. But you don't care about textbooks. You care that someone out there is shouting what you've been murmuring for years. And when someone pins a parchment to a tree nearby, anonymous, ink still wet, it says one thing. When Adam delved and Eve span, who then was the gentleman? You stand before it a long while, letting the words settle. The wind flutters the page. A robin hops nearby, then flies off. You don't tear it down. You don't add to it. You simply nod. That night, a storm comes. Rain rattling like pebbles on the roof. You sit inside, candle flickering, wrapping a loaf in linen. Outside, thunder stutters across the sky like angry hooves. And yet you feel calm. Because you know the storm isn't just weather. It's history. And this time, you're part of it, not crushed beneath it. You tuck your niece into her straw bed. She asks if there will be dragons tomorrow. Maybe, you say. But we've beaten worse. You don't mean sickness, or hunger, or war. You mean silence, obedience, fear dressed up as law. And you've learned how to speak. That's the real miracle. Not that you survived, but that you changed. And no one, not a clerk, not a crown, not a crumbling old law can unchange you now. You're threshing barley when they arrive. 5 men on horses, wearing crests that shimmer like lies. Their leader looks down at you the way a child might study a beetle, curious, dismissive, faintly amused. He reads a scroll. It says your taxes are increasing. Again, that certain freedoms granted during the emergency years are no longer applicable. That your village is to surrender 2 goats, a sack of flour, and a labor tithe by next week. You wipe your brow, lean on your flail, and say, very calmly, no. He blinks. You repeat it, softer this time, like a lullaby. No. That's the thing about having nothing. It teaches you not to care. But having something, even a little, a piglet, a story, a song you wrote yourself, teaches you what's worth protecting. The horsemen ride on. You half expect them to return with steel and fire. They don't. Not yet. Historians still argue whether the refusal of rural communities to comply with post-plague taxes was coordinated rebellion or individual defiance stacking into something seismic. But you know this much. One person's courage feeds another's, like bread or gossip or wildfire. You gather with the others that night, not in a chapel, but near the mill. The wheel creaks beside you, wet with mist, turning slowly. Someone brings turnip stew. Someone else brings a poem they wrote about a duck that falls in love with a candle. It's very weird, but you laugh until you wheeze. This is strategy in its own way, resilience disguised as joy. Meanwhile, the seasons shift. Your crops do well. Your new tools last longer. You've even begun trading outside your county. A cooper from 4 towns over visits to inspect your barrels. He's unimpressed, but you trade jokes and cider and send him off whistling. And then, news. The rebellion failed. Leaders executed. Villagers punished. Taves ream-nosed. Castles fortified. You pause, stir the stew, stare at the sky a long while. Tea. This is Resilien Minior Crayuv Cooper barrels, and sit then you plant more onions. Because you've learned something deeper than resistance. You've learned persistence. You still bake bread, still dry herbs, still whisper to the cows when they give you more milk than usual. The world above may teeter, but you've made peace with living at the roots. Odd detail. Some villages begin crafting their own currency tokens, wooden discs marked with symbols or names. Not legal tender, but trusted. Local. Yours. You trade one for a pair of shears, a symbol of your harvest stamped right in the middle. You feel a swell of pride. And the traveler from the city scoffs when he sees it. Leaders reim-nos. You ask him how much flour he has. He goes quiet. There's dignity here, in your mud-streaked world, in the way you weave baskets from memory, in the way your neighbor sings lullabies in Welsh, even though she was born 5 miles from you and you've never quite figured out the words, in the way you bury your dead with stones shaped like suns and no one remembers why you do it, but you always do it. And you feel something that's not quite safety, not quite power, but very close to home. Even the children walk differently now. Less cowering, more curiosity. They ask questions about clouds, about the stars, about why apples float. You have answers to some. Others you send them to old Rena for. She knows 100 things you don't. You call it your village university. One child quips that Rena should charge tuition. You all groan, but the thought lingers. Learning as a kind of rebellion. Knowledge passed hand to hand, not locked in books or pulpits. You sketch letters on birch bark. Teach a neighbor how to read sun and mud and hope. He cries a little. One night, a fire breaks out in the smithy. Flames licking skyward like angry saints. No one dies, but the loss feels heavy. The next morning, you rebuild it. Together. By nightfall, it's half standing. And someone brings a stew. And someone brings a story. And the smith, soot-faced and shaking, says he's never felt richer. That's the secret, isn't it? Wealth isn't gold. It's hands that help when yours fall short. You fall asleep that night on a hay bundle, watching fireflies blink in the rafters. They flicker like distant stars, and you think, this is it. Not the end of the world, not the start of a new one, but the middle of something soft and real and earned. You, a former serf, barely literate, half-healed and always tired, you have made a life. Not the one the Lord's planned, the one you carved out of frost and bread and borrowed time. And no one, not death, nor plague, nor scroll, can take that from you now. The winters grow milder. Or maybe you just grow tougher. You've taken to waking before dawn, not from duty, but from habit. You like the silence, the way the dark feels heavier just before it begins to lift. You wrap yourself in a rough woven cloak, stoke the embers, and press your palm to the wall of your cottage, checking for damp. There's less of it now. You fixed the thatch last summer with your neighbor's son. He's grown tall. You joke that he's part ladder. Outside, the land yawns wide and forgiving. You never thought you'd see it this way. Not as burden, but as belonging. The old lord of the manor has died. His son rides through once a season, mostly to nod at things and complain about the dust. He raised the tithe once. You lowered your yield in response. It became an unspoken truce. You're not the only one. Across the countryside, more and more peasants live on their own terms. No grand banners, no revolutions, just quiet decisions, made one furrow, one fence, one barter at a time. Historians still argue whether this peasant autonomy marked a true social shift or was merely a lull before new feudal clamps took hold. But you don't care what they call it. You call it enough. The market fairs are livelier now. You walk among tables strung with wool, salt, herbs, baked apples, and the occasional miracle, a length of dyed silk, a music pipe from Venice, a hand mirror framed in iron. You trade for a mirror once. Your niece begs for it. When she sees her face, she gasps and asks if she's a princess. You say yes, of course, and she insists you bow to her. So you do, right there in the mud. It becomes a story she tells for years. One man brings a strange cart that plays music when you turn a crank. It shrieks like a cat for the first 5 tries, then sings something that sounds like rain dancing. A fringe curiosity. Maybe. But it leaves you thinking. About invention. About what lies beyond. You hear rumors of books. More of them. Written in English now, not just Latin. Some say one day everyone will be able to read. You scoff. You can barely carve your name. But the thought clings to you like thistle. You ask old Rena about books. She says they're heavy and full of lies, but also that they smell like summer. You're not sure what that means, but it feels right. This year, you keep bees. You don't mean to. They move into a broken cask near your shed. But they thrive. You watch them daily. They teach you rhythm and work and the sacredness of sweetness. You start calling them my girls. You talk to them like neighbors. One stings you. You apologize. There's a harvest festival, bigger than any in memory. Bread towers, roast turnips, minstrels with pipes, a puppet play about death losing a game of dice to a goose. You laugh so hard you drop your mug of ale. The children run barefoot through the grass. The old folk dance with reckless dignity. You see a woman from 2 villages over. You share a look, a nod. It's enough. That night, you sit with your back against a barrel watching the stars. You whisper the names you've made up for them. The plow, the fox, the ladle, the cheese wheel. You don't need a monk to approve them. You name one after your mother. Odd detail. In some parts of medieval England, peasants believed stars were the souls of unbaptized infants. You think that's morbid, but you like the idea of stars remembering names. A boy approaches you, maybe 12. He asks if you'll show him how to fix a shoe. You agree. His hands are too big for his age, his knuckles raw. You think of yourself, decades ago. Hungry, hollow, lost in someone else's story. But not now. You teach him the stitch. He learns it in 3 tries. He thanks you. Not with words, but with a smile that feels like the future. You feel a strange warmth in your chest, deep and quiet. Not pride, something older, like a tree's knowing. Because survival, real survival, isn't just staying alive. It's teaching others how. That night, someone sings a song about a lady who turns into a swan to escape marriage. You hum along. You remember the words. You don't know how. The village lights burn late. Someone spills ale into the fire, and it flares briefly, gold and angry, then settles. You realize something, sitting there, watching sparks drift skyward. The world isn't ending. The world already ended. And this is what came after. Not castles, not kings, not plagues or prophets or promises, just people, trying again. You stand, stretch your back, look to the sky. There's a chill in the air, a promise of winter. You're ready. The days shorten, but your stride doesn't. You rise before the frost melts, boots stiff, breath fogging the air like a dragon you once heard about in a song. Not that you ever saw one, of course. Dragons are for lords and parchment. You deal in more reliable creatures. Pigs, geese, and that one sheep who keeps escaping because she knows she can. You've begun keeping records, not official ones. No scribe would bother with your scratches, but they're yours. Weather notes, crop yield, which herbs helped with that cough last spring. You even mark dreams sometimes, like the one about the ox that spoke Latin. Still not sure if that was stew-related. They say time is a wheel, but to you it's more like a path through mist. You only see a few steps ahead, but your feet know where to land. There's a rhythm now. Not ease exactly, but flow. You can predict your potatoes. You know the look in a chicken's eye when she's about to lay. You know the way the village elder clears his throat before telling a long, winding story with no point, but also, somehow, every point. You know your place. Not in the sense the lords meant, with their scrolls and spears and tithes. You mean the real kind, the earth beneath you kind. Historians still argue whether this was a true golden age for peasants or just a brief breath between disasters. But in your bones, you know, for a little while, the land listened. More children survive now. That alone feels like a miracle. You watch them run through the fields, shrieking about knights and witches and whatever mischief they imagine. You think of the Black Death, of famine, of fire, of fear so thick you could chew it. And now, laughter thickens the air instead. Evenings are the best. That in-between hush, candles low, stew bubbling. The dog curled by the hearth. Someone's always singing. Sometimes you, sometimes the wind. A traveling friar stops by 1 week. He's younger than you expect, with patched robes and eyes that carry too many stories. He offers sermons, but you ask for gossip. He laughs and tells you about a village that believes sneezes are tiny curses that only pick on lazy people. You laugh so hard you snort. You offer him honeycomb. He offers a prayer, a fair trade, an odd detail. Some villagers now wear little satchels of herbs and dried frog skin around their necks. Protection, they say, against bad dreams or taxes, maybe both. No one laughs at the charm makers anymore, not after everything. You walk the border of the fields more often these days, not because you have to, but because you want to. It's become a kind of ritual, a conversation with the land. You murmur to the soil, pat the trees, thank them. They don't answer, but they feel like they do. You catch yourself smiling more. That deep kind, the kind that settles behind your eyes and refuses to leave, even when the mud cakes your boots and the rooster screams at 4 a.m. you get a letter once, delivered by a merchant's boy. It's written by someone you knew long ago, a girl who used to steal turnips and now runs a cloth shop in the city. She writes about glass windows, foreign spices, people who pay to have their fortunes told in candle wax. But she ends with, "I miss the quiet." You write back, "The quiet misses you. There's talk of a new king, or maybe the same one, but older. You barely keep track. Doesn't matter much unless he shows up to dig your well, which, let's be honest, he won't. Still, there's a strange thrill in knowing that no matter who wears the crown, your world keeps turning. The last frost comes late this year. Then the crocuses arrive, purple and smug, like they always knew spring was coming. You kneel by the first bloom, touch its petals, whisper, "You made it." And somehow you mean you. The final night of the season, there's a gathering. Not a feast, food's too tight, but a fire, and music, and stories told so slowly they sound like prayers. One woman recounts how her grandmother outwitted a lord by pretending to be mad and chasing him with a fish. Another tells a love story between a mason and a ghost. Someone begins to weep softly. You hand them your sleeve, you take a turn. Tell your story, not the whole of it, but a piece. The part about the dead field that bloomed after the plague. The barley that refused to quit. The bees. No one speaks for a moment.